the Critical Media Literacy Conference of the Americas. Let's see here. There are a couple of things that I need to review today, but first of all, I just want to say thank you again for attending, and also thank you very much for our two discussants, Jen Stacy with Liberation in Emergent Literacy, Critical Media Literacy as an Approach to Creating Children's Picture Books in Early Childhood, and Mike Karlin, Decoding Artificial Intelligence, Incorporating Critical Media Literacy into Computer Science Education to Promote Algorithmic Justice. Looking forward to these great ideas from two great people. I must say, these are my two colleagues from California State University, Dominguez Hills. Had to put in that shout out. Now, on with the program. We're so very glad to have you, and I want to take time to acknowledge the many people who have volunteered their time for the last year in order to manifest this free and virtual conference for the second year in a row. So thank you so much to the volunteers. Like I said, it's been a year of planning, and I just want to acknowledge the people behind the scenes. So thank you so much. Also, this is the last day, but please feel free to share the conference program, to register. Have your people register, anybody in your networks. Also, please follow us on Critical Media Literacy, I should say at CMLCA number 4 ALL. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Now, let me give you a little bit of background about what we're doing today. This session is being recorded, so if you are under the age of 18 or just prefer not to be recorded, please turn off your video and remove your name in order to be anonymous. If a problem occurs and the Zoom closes, first try to re-enter the same Zoom room, and if that doesn't work, go to the lobby on the visual schedule of the conference labeled Help. More context about salons. This space comes from the tradition of the Harlem Renaissance. It's a supportive, welcoming environment for artists to gather. And so with that said, all perspectives are welcome. You don't need to be an expert in this topic. I'll be the host to guide the conversation to ensure that everyone who wants to speak will have an opportunity to do so, to share in this supportive, meaningful, and collaborative environment that encourages respectful participation. We have 60 minutes to discuss, and as we say down south, kick off your shoes, relax your feet, enjoy, discuss ideas, and build community. Now, let me turn to the bios of our great discussants today. In this order, Professor Jen Stacy is an associate professor in the College of Education at California State University, Dominguez Hills. She teaches classes in the Liberal Studies Department on the foundations of education and multiliteracies and language learning. Her research focuses on family-school relations and humanizing practices and teacher education. Professor Mike Karlin. Mike is a former pre-K through 12th grade science and computer teacher. He currently supports future educators at California State University, Dominguez Hills on their journey to the classroom with a focus on critical, justice-oriented STEM integration. His research centers around broadening participation in STEM and computer science, as well as leveraging instructional design and educational technology to increase access and equity. Mike and his partner, Pamela, live in Long Beach with their 17-month-old Brooklyn. Hi, Brooklyn, who loves discovering new animal sounds. Thank you to the two of you today. I turn it over to Professor Stacy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us and for showing up on a Sunday afternoon. I'm just going to start my timer here so that I don't go over. I'm really excited to share this work with you today. Give me just 1 second because I do have some sound. I want to make sure it's all set up. So the title of this presentation is Liberation in Emergent Literacy. And essentially what I want to share with you today is how we have applied, and I say we because Dr. Humphrey is part of this project as well, but really how we've applied Freire's concepts to understanding emergent literacy for our students who are pre-service teachers and who intend to work with young kids. So they're looking at maybe working in preschools or early elementary. And essentially what we've done is we've taken these concepts from Freire of generative themes, right? So if you've read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, you might be familiar with generative themes as a praxis of liberation. And if not, I'm going to explain to you the Reader's Digest version of this. So Freire is really well known, right, for this notion of understanding the word in order to understand the world, and understanding the world in order to understand the word, right? Generative themes is one way that he approaches this philosophy, right? It's one way. So what he talks about is how, as people, right, when we're understanding our world, we start to discuss issues, we start to discuss our experiences with privilege and oppression, and we start to identify themes that are generative from our society, from our environment, and from our context. And the teacher and the students do this together, right? It's a collective effort in research. From there, we begin to name those themes, right? And we codify them, and we codify them through text, through dialogues, through our words. And as we'll look at here in this project, also through our multi-literacies. From there, once we understand the themes, we continue to revisit them. We look more at the nuances, we generate new themes, right? We continue to do this research and this practice as we're making sense of the world. And then eventually, right, we start to use those themes, the naming of themes, our dialogue, our voices, what we're here, right, for this conference for, to take action, right, and to transform the world. And then this is, of course, what Freire calls praxis. So in my course, it's LBS 310 that I share with Dr. Humphrey. We've applied this to emergent literacy, right? Emergent, what was previously conceived as emergent reading and writing has now become more expansive. So we start with this notion of social worlds and understanding, helping students to see that literacies are embedded in social worlds. And that this starts from birth, right? As soon as children enter into our society, before children enter into our society, actually, in utero. And to help with this, we've used Mariana Soto Manning's work called Rethinking Early Literacies, where she really showcases how young children are understanding multi-literacies that are embedded in their social worlds. So our students explore this. We do a lot of work with these concepts. Then we ask them to codify these social worlds through a community literacies project. And for this, in my class, I used Flipgrid, where they're actually videoing their social world, they're bringing it to life, and they're naming different themes, right, that they see that are related to justice and injustice and their realities. And then they're showing, right, how they're codified through not just print literacies, not just words, right, but also through multi-literacies. From there, they take that and they put it into a children's book. So they stem from their social cultural worlds, from their social worlds, and they make a children's book that codifies that then now in a different way, right? That is something that would be reflective of their social world if they were a kid in their classroom, right? These are going to be teachers, so then also thinking about the social worlds of their students, right? And really codifying that. I'll just give a shout out to the Student Treasures Publishing that we've been using. That is a great resource for teachers who are interested in doing this project in their classroom. We've then since extended that into a broader project to take action in our community. It's called Project Cycle, where we are pretty much distributing the books that are being made from this process to our local communities. We have a preschool on campus. And so it's, really starting to reach out into our communities. But what I really want to share with you today is the story of Francisco. And he's a student who went through this process. And Francisco really got this notion of social worlds like right away. Like he understood clearly what we meant by social worlds. And early on in our semester, he shared with me this documentary. It's called Los Punks. If you haven't seen it, you should totally see it. You can find it for free on internet. That studied and captured the kind of social world of the East LA punk scene. And this was the world that Francisco kind of grew up in and had deep connections to. He still identifies as a punk. I'll play just like 30 seconds so you can kind of get a sense of what he was sharing with us. When Francisco brought this to me, we decided to make this a class text. And so we watched it together as a class, and Francisco kind of emceed that process and gave us insight into this social world. And the beautiful thing about this film is that you can really see lots of different languages and literacies, and you can see how people are codifying, their realities and their beliefs. So I'll just play like 30 seconds here.
What do you listen to? Why does your hair look like that? What is that crap? I'm a punk. I love music. I love noise.
When I first went to my first show, I didn't know who the bands are. It was awesome.
The backyards, there's no rules. It's just raw. I've seen fights, people throwing bottles, shootings. I got stabbed 3 times already. There's like street punk, anarcho-punk, crust punk, thrash metal, death metal, black metal, death thrash metal. It's just a multiplex of different genres out there. As far as
so you start to hear, right, some of the language that's like very punk specific and some of the themes that are generated from this. This is very like different than maybe what you would expect to see in an early emergent literacy classroom, right? So after we've done this, right, like, and we understand this sociocultural world, and this is Francisco's community literacies project. And I'm going to share a few minutes of this with you so you can start to see how he's not just understanding the social world, right, of the punk scene, but how he's starting to apply principles of emergent literacy in naming that world and in naming some of the themes of justice and injustice. So this is on Flipgrid, and here we go.
Hi, my name is Francisco Gonzalez, and for my cultural literacy, I picked the skinhead scene and skinhead culture. For my expert, I brought my brother Brian. And quick background on Brian. For those who've seen the Los Punk videos with us last week, I showed this picture. This was our crew coming up. That's a young Brian, and that's me. We came up together. We joined the military together. Now we have an apartment together. You're honestly my best friend. Brian, please tell me about the punk scene.
So I got into the punk scene around 13, 14 through my childhood friend. We were watching skate videos, and his dad kind of like exposed us to like the music, first being Germs, and then it just snowballed. And then going to our first punk show, I started having Liberty spikes, patches, tight jeans, the boots, the bum flap, taking not so many showers.
So that's the punk scene. But I want to talk to you more about the skinhead scene now. At some point in your youth, you made this transition. Tell me about that.
So around 15, 16, I mean, I met some guys that were skinheads, and they told me about the culture. I fell in love with it. I decided to shave my head, polish my boots, take more showers, dress proper, wear polo shirts.
Okay, so I want to talk about this real quick because you said that that you fell in love with the culture. So the elephant in the room is: are you a Nazi? Are you a racist?
I am not a racist, and I am not a Nazi.
Well, you were talking about these pipe shirts, and I know that you have one that's an example for us. This is a non-print literacy. So I'm at a punk show, and someone's wearing this shirt. What can you tell me about this?
So there's the Fred Perry, which is one of the original ones of the skinhead culture, and it's basically a symbol of working class.
Why? Like, why is this a symbol of working class? Why can't I be a skinhead in my punk shirt?
Well, because the whole idea is to dress proper.
Okay. So you're saying that this is working class. You're saying that you worked hard for your money all day, and now you spent on a nice shirt, and you're going to go out in public and show that. Okay, so I want to talk about this. So I know for a fact that Fred Perry has the same exact shirt, except all the blue on the shirt is yellow, and Proud Boys wear it. I also know that Proud Boys are affiliated with hate, Nazis, and I know that Fred Perry is a member of the LGBTQ community. How does they feel about Nazis wearing these clothes?
So Fred Perry discontinued the yellow on yellow trim, and they released a statement saying that they do not stand by
And how does that make you feel?
I stand with Fred Perry, but I hate that Proud Boys have stolen and tarnished the image.
So you're saying that if you're wearing this shirt, I should just think you're a skinhead, but if you're wearing this shirt that's yellow on yellow, I should think that's Nazi?
Yes.
And you're saying that you stand against that, and Fred Perry stands against that?
Yes.
Oh, that's really interesting. Are there other ways that I could look at a skinhead and I guess tell their beliefs?
Yeah, so the footwear is one of them.
Okay.
It's one of the most prominent. The original one was the 1969 original skinheads. They would wear the 3-eye, and they would wear with flat white laces back in 1969 in England.
So you're saying 69, that obviously predates punk. Punk is 72 to 77. They're innovators. They're not even calling themselves punk yet. So how is this, I guess, related?
So it relates because the whole idea of it was about unity, and it was in the culture back then. It was about Jamaican music, reggae.
So that's what they were listening to pre-punk.
Pre-punk was.
Okay, so now tell me about the punk days in skinheadness.
All right, so when punk came around, it's more about shock value. So then you have these big ass commandos right here, and these were to shock the people, to scare them off.
Okay, so I know that punks wear these. You're telling me skinheads wear these too, and that they keep them clean.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between them and punk. But I know that Nazis wear the boots just like this. How am I supposed to know you're not a Nazi if you're rocking this?
So the way you know that you're not a Nazi is when you wear the flat white laces. But when you're a Nazi, since they're all militarized and militia style, they wear the round white laces.
Come on, Brian. That's just like a shape. What does round laces really have to do different?
So the round laces is more about similar to what we wore in the military was our black round laces. So it's more militarized.
So you're saying they're trying to look like a militia?
Militia, yeah. But they wear the white because it's signifying white pride.
So how have non-racist skinheads combated this idea?
So since they became so polarized like that there became a group called Sharps, Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice, and what they ended up doing was wearing yellow laces to signify that they stand against hate, stand against racism.
So you're telling me if I see a guy that looks like a Nazi, or what I think a Nazi looks like, but he's rocking yellow laces, I should assume that not only is he not racist, that he stands firmly against racism?
Yes.
Wow. What about print literacies? So I know that. So we're talking about the symbols that we see.
Okay, I'll stop it there just for time. But you start to get a sense, right, of how these multiple literacies are embedded in this punk world. They go into some print symbols and what have you. And so Francisco really delved into this, right? He's here, up in these levels, right, revisiting this theme, really codifying and understanding how this world, how his experiences in this world, right, are situated within issues of justice and injustice. And so then from there, he develops this children's book. It's a children's book that he would have wanted to see, right, in his classroom when he was growing up. So this is a cover of his book, and this is the most punk rock children's book you'll ever see. All of his drawings are on notebook paper, and it's about this main character called Javier. He's a punk rocker. He's got the mohawk, and it just kind of takes us through the different things that he encounters based on his looks, but then also all of the funds of knowledge and skills that he has, right? So there's a whole scene where punk rock Javi or whatever, punk rock Jav is taking money, he takes money for bands, and he has all of these different literacies because of that. And he ends this book kind of right with the call of, obviously this is Francisco's story, right? He wants to grow up to be a teacher, and he wants that all kids are seen and valued in his classroom. And he's still got the mohawk, and that's very much representative of where Francisco stands, as he's now a student teacher, sporting his punk everything every day, but really, finding spaces of liberation in his own classroom. So I'll stop there and happy to chat more as we get into discussion.
Thank you, Professor Stacy, for that. Can we give a reaction? Thank you for that. Next, Professor Karlin, Decoding Artificial Intelligence. Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Stacy for that. Dr. Humphrey, also thank you for the, you acknowledge at the beginning the labor of everyone behind the scenes, but also just to acknowledge your labor and love that you have put into this conference and all the work that you have done. Thank you for that. So there's a lot of interesting, that's the first time I've seen, Jen, your work. So there's a lot of interesting overlaps, I think, to what I'm going to talk about too. And unlike Dr. Stacy, I am more at the beginning of my career. I'm first year faculty here at Dominguez Hills, and just beginning sort of some ideas. So I'm very grateful for this Salon space to talk about some of these things with you and open up some of these ideas also. So just to give a little background and context to start, my focus is in K-12 computer science education. And over the last 5 years, there's been a really enormous shift in how this field has been viewed. There is a very rooted in capitalistic interests, a massive push for more people in computer sciences. And what this has led to is a big push at the K-12 level to get teachers teaching computer science in their classrooms, whether or not they have a background in it, whether or not they have training in it. The idea is we need more computer scientists in our workforce, so let's get teachers teaching this and let's figure out how to do that. And the conversations around equity and justice and anti-oppressive frameworks has been very limited to sort of these traditional neoliberal arguments of we have a workforce shortage, so we just need to get more people into the industry. So this sort of looks like the diversity conversation really started as how do we get more non-white, non-male students into computer science education, as opposed to looking at what are the barriers, what are the problems in the system that maybe keep these underrepresented folks out. It's been more about just how do we increase numbers, which I think is a problematic way to approach this question. But in more recent years, this conversation has really begun to shift to examine how computer science education is really perpetuating systems of inequity, systems of harm, systems of oppression. And so what is beginning to happen is these emerging conversations around how do we prepare K-12 teachers to integrate computer science into their classrooms, and how do we do it where these ideas are rooted in those conversations. So it's not just teaching computer science because there's good jobs, but it's acknowledging that computer science perpetuates a lot of harm and oppression, and that needs to be challenged and reckoned with. A recent example from earlier this month, maybe you all are familiar with, Facebook has, probably not to the surprise of a lot of folks, been incentivizing angry content. So content that makes you angry and that is polarizing and divisive, and because that's the content that gets clicks, it gets people coming back to engage in arguments in the comments. It gets people clicking on articles multiple times to go back to it. And so the fact that this has become so embedded in our social media landscape without really any challenge to it at all, I would argue is very problematic. So when Jen was talking a minute ago about literacies and early literacies, there is this recent push also to include computer science technology literacy amongst those early literacies, just because of all of these ways that even from a young elementary age, technology, social media is influencing our culture, our interactions, and it mediates how we see the world, how we interact with each other. And so these types of understandings are becoming more, it's becoming more necessary for these types of understandings to be foundational, I think. So for this conversation, I am starting to explore the best ways to talk about these ideas and support future educators in oftentimes who have no background in computer science with how to think about these things, how to talk about these things, how to have these conversations in their future classrooms. And I've really found critical media literacy frameworks to be helpful to that. So I'll share a little more of that in a second. But I think there's a very important intersection between critical media literacy, the ways in which technology and computer science perpetuates these systems of oppression. And then there's also a lot of overlap, of course, with Freire's work as well that I'll pull in here at the end. But I wanted to define a few terms to start, because I know when we talk about artificial intelligence, computer science, programming, algorithms, that I think it's not always done in accessible ways where people who aren't necessarily familiar with these terms and how these things work can connect with these ideas. So I wanted to start by just sort of operationalizing and defining some of these ideas, hopefully in ways that are accessible. So when we're talking about artificial intelligence, it's become a bit of a buzzword in recent years, but it's this idea of computers being able to do tasks that are usually done by humans. Or in other words, when computers simulate human thinking and problem solving. So when we give a task to a computer and say, solve this problem, that in the past would maybe be something that we as humans solve. And computers do this through the use of algorithms, which is just a procedure for solving a problem, a step-by-step procedure. So I think some of these times, these definitions can get a little convoluted in the computer science and technology spaces. So hopefully this is a more accessible way to talk about these things. And some examples of the ways we all use artificial intelligence in everyday life: media recommendations on Netflix or Hulu, our social media feeds, our maps and navigation apps, chatbots for customer service, facial recognition, spam filters, banking in terms of who gets approved for loans and who doesn't, how our credit scores are valued, predictive online searches when you start typing something and the prospective answers pop up, digital assistants. All of these tools use artificial intelligence to help determine what is a quote unquote objective right answer based on what the system has decided. So these have become really integrated in our daily life, and in a lot of ways without any pushback or challenge, and just seen as this sort of more objective way to do things because it's computers making decisions, not humans making decisions. But issues arise with that because it's actually humans creating these programs, and that's called machine learning. So the way computers learn to do things is we as humans train them, is the term that's usually used. So for example, if we want a computer to be able to recognize a picture of a dog, we would give the computer 100,000 pictures of dogs, but also of other things: cats, squirrels, bats, lions, whatever. And we would say, these are the dogs, these are the not dogs. And the computer would analyze all of those pictures and then say, all right, I think I've got it. I think I can identify a dog. And then we would feed the computer future data, and the computer would recognize dogs or not. But the issue there is that it's still humans with our biases, with our data sets that are rooted in historical systems of inequity and oppression and biases that we are giving to the computer. So all of these things that we're building to be quote unquote objective are still built on our historical systems, which is what's called algorithmic bias, where systematic and repeatable errors in these programs create unfair outcomes. Because as computers learn, they're learning from historical data sets. So all of these ideas are what I'm trying to sort of boil down into a way that's accessible for future teachers to take and integrate into their future classroom. And that's what I'm kind of hoping to talk more about today, of just what people think about those ideas and where they're at. And I have some other resources. Ruha Benjamin, which I think Dr. Humphrey mentioned in the chat, calls this the new Jim Code, how technologies are employed to perpetuate these existing inequities. And there's just countless examples how these inequities manifest in quote unquote objective systems. But then there's also a lot of people working towards this idea of algorithmic justice. Joy Buolamwini out of MIT has a wonderful film on Netflix called Coded Bias, which deconstructs a lot of these issues. And then I think there's a lot of overlap between critical media literacy, these early literacies Dr. Stacy was talking about. And this is a framework Dr. Humphrey provided, but about media, but then I changed this to just, instead of media, say computer program or artificial intelligence. And I think these questions are very pertinent and important for these types of conversations too. So that's kind of where I'm starting with these ideas. And it's not as much an endpoint as Dr. Stacy has as a starting point for the work I'm starting to do. But I think there's a lot of overlap there and would love to just talk more about this.
Thank you so much, Professor Karlin. Can we give a warm reaction? A warm reaction. I'm turning to the chat. We already have a question. Let's see. The question is from Justin. How does humanizing the language, learning intelligence surrounding technological systems normalize the bias misapplication of these systems? When we use words associated with organic thought processes, do we allow machines to behave in flawed ways? So thank you. The first question is, how does humanizing the language, learning intelligence surrounding technological systems normalize the bias misapplication of these systems? Who wants to take on that massive question? Thank you, Justin, for making this brain work.
Yeah, that is a wonderful, wonderful question. And I love that. And I mean, I am guilty of that in the last 10 or 15 minutes also, of humanizing technology and anthropomorphizing technology as well. And so, yeah, it does. I think it also, I think we tend to view technology as something other than ourselves, as this neutral tool, or at least in the circles I'm in, a lot of times we have this habit of viewing technology as this machine thing that's other than ourselves, that's completely objective and neutral. And in the STEM field in general, we have a long history of saying science is objective, it's based on fact, technology is objective. And so perhaps there's also a way of, by humanizing it, acknowledging also that it is prone to mistakes and subjectivity and bias and error, just as we are. So that's my first initial thought, but I really love that question and I want to keep talking about it more.
Jen, do you have any thoughts about that first part of the question? And the second part of the question too is, when we use words associated with organic thought processes, do we allow machines to behave in flawed ways?
Yeah, the first thought that came to my mind was, wow, I really hope Mike answers this question now. But also, I was thinking, I'm working on a few projects, and my original, my positionality as the researcher is as I'm an ethnographer, and so I'm always kind of looking at the semiotic seed of what's happening, right? Like, so what is being codified, like the smallest moment of like culture, right? And semiotics, and what I thought about was like how language does that to us, and then we come out of these semiotic structures with products, right? And okay, so let's see if I can say this. So like part of then that semiotics is labeling those products as this or that, right? And so we see this in schools, we see this with little kids, like we'll just teach them how to read, right? Teach them how to read Dick and Jane, right? Teach them how, oh, this is a fine book, even though it's set in the suburbs and it doesn't reflect any reality that students leave, or it's a different language than they were taught, or it's a different variety of language, right? And so we see then, even like if I had to make the comparison to like picture books as technology, technologies, right? Like we see that they've been codified as neutral, as, good, as, like, oh, it doesn't matter what they're reading as long as they're reading, right? We've heard that. And so we kind of have this sense of once we get to these cultural products, that then the culture names the product, right, as like good or benevolent or useful or progress. Oh, that's a big one, right? Like, oh, we're progressive because we're doing this. And then it goes like so far that it doesn't get critiqued, right? And so this is where I think at least the Freirean approach of generative themes helps us to understand our relationships with those products and get more nuance and how they are, not neutral and how they are problematic and oppressive, right, at times. But I like speaking of machines, though. That's all, Mike.
Thank you, Jen, for that. We have another comment from Justin. We call it facial recognition, but there is no cognition occurring. It's complex shape identification. Could we critically analyze the language surrounding technological features to be more honest about its limitations and inherent biases? And also, who's using this information? What are you doing with this information? Right?
Yes, all of those questions. Justin, yes, I think we absolutely could do that. The language we use it's so much marketing and branding, and like, how do we sell these things as progress, as Jen was just saying, as fancy new features. And Amina, what do we do with all this data? That's another part of this sort of foundational literacy, I think. If we have kids as early as elementary school giving personal information, facial recognition, all of these things to sort of this great unknown digital ether. But that data is being used and mined and sold and profited off of. So I think all of those things are really important questions.
Yeah, it can just like the facial tech recognition. Your question reminded me. So yesterday we talked a little bit about Foucault's panopticon in today's world and today's landscape, and with Zoom and everything. And this exactly what Mike was just saying about how we've given up so much of our information. And another side of that, right, is that I'm borrowing this phrase. I had to look it up. It's from these researchers called Dobson and Fitcher, who study like geospatial surveillance technologies. And they're saying that, one of the things that we've forgotten, or that as we are working in the name of progress, is that we've minimized these political costs. And so what we're doing is we're saying that there's not we don't see them as cost worthy to us. We don't see the immediate damage. So then we're giving over to these different power relationships, and we're buying into this notion of yes, just have this one-way relationship with me where you get everything and then I get to be controlled by that, and without adding that layer of criticality, of examination and understanding what's happening. Again, even seeing that as a literacy, right? Then we're perpetually into this very, very sketchy ground, at least in my opinion.
And Justin says minimizing political costs. That's huge.
Yeah, here, I'll pull the full quote. But y'all can see it.
So I have, as the both of you were presenting, and feel free, audience, feel free to pose more questions. That's what we want to do, engage in this discussion. I couldn't help but think about just some anecdotes from the last year during this pandemic. Having accessibility to a laptop, having accessibility to a smartphone, having accessibility to the internet, having accessibility to electricity. And sometimes we make assumptions about the accessibility of the aforementioned, but can you talk about technology and the K through 12 students, and even some of the students that we may teach in higher education as it relates to accessibility and technology. And literacies, books, and beyond.
Jen, do you want to go first on this one?
I'm shy. You know, like I think it's so interesting, right? Because we spent so much time. I'm just gonna like, you know, think about the past year, like with March 2020, right? With the onset of the pandemic, we spent so much time thinking about technological access, right? Getting people laptops, and we saw, like, I mean, I think one of the things that the pandemic taught us was just it showed us in ways that haven't been shown before just how, like, the disinvestment in our communities, right, the impact that that's had. And then even, right, when the laptops from the school did go home, right, people in certain parts of town got certain, you know, laptops that were 6 years old and barely functioning, while as other people in other parts of town got you know, brand new things. And of course that's along racial lines and inequities as we know them. But then it's like the other thing I think is that we just imposed, right, like what the technology is, how it should be used, as opposed to like thinking, having any kind of conversations of morals and ethics around that. And then also without really taking an understanding of how people are utilizing these tools in their daily lives and how they're culturally relevant to them, to then draw upon that, right? And let alone, we didn't think maybe we could use these tools to like actually enhance culturally responsive learning. Like, I mean, that's just my, you know, bird's eye view of the field. And one of the things that was really interesting to me while like doing this project is I did a survey with my class to see kind of who has what kind of technologies and what, you know, what's going to happen. And then if students didn't have like access to like a full laptop or something, I worked with our campus like to get it to them. But what I noticed with this project, right, so we were using these different platforms like Flipgrid, like the student treasures, and we did a few other things along the way to get them to the point for what you saw. And every time, like, you know, an issue would come up and I'm like, okay, well, all you have to do, and I share my screen, is do this, do this, do this. And then I'm talking with students and they're like, you know, on a smartphone, or they're like on, you know, a laptop, even though I know, or I'm sorry, on an iPad or something, even though I know that they have a laptop, right? And so then like simultaneously, I'm like, oh, okay, let me download the app and let me get the instructions for the app, like just something simple like that. And then what, like, just to add a layer to it, is like, I was just blown away by some of the creations that came out of the smartphone, right, compared to what I was anticipating from like the desktop, right? And the smartphone is something, if you spend some time talking with your students and kind of understanding how they approached all of this, you know, the smartphone goes with them on the bus, the smartphone is with them at the dinner table, the smartphone, right, is actually embedded in their daily lives. So the work that you're getting from them, whether it's something multimedia like this project, or maybe, you know, from somewhere else, like you are getting like really rich stuff like from their lives. And this came out especially in those community literacies projects, because like some of these like deeply embedded, like some, like the stuff I had access to, I was like, whoa, in a normal classroom, in a normal situation, it would never have gone that deep. And so, you know, like I'm kind of like, there's this like line of like criticality that I am also, you know, very much subscribing to, and then there's this line of like, oh wow, this is it, right, this is the good stuff. And I think the Farian pedagogies in me is trying to figure out how to, you know, be in the humanizing circle 100% and not do any of this like damage, right, that we know has been done. I don't know if I answered a question.
I was just gonna, I think you beautifully and perfectly capture that balance. On one hand, it's this almost assumption of accessibility that if we as an institution, Dominguez Hills or K-12 district, say we're having classes on Zoom, and so if you don't have Wi-Fi, we'll set up Wi-Fi routers in the parking lot. If you don't have a laptop, we'll loan you a laptop. But basically, you need to get on Zoom. You need to provide Zoom with all your personal information. You need to download these apps. You need to provide those apps with all your personal information. And if you can't figure out how to do that, then you can't successfully engage in our education program. And that, and there, like you said, Jen, there's no criticality to that. Like the fact that Zoom has gone from being somewhat used to being almost universally used in a very short time without any real consideration as to why this tool, why this company, like it's just become the norm. There's that side of it, which I think is problematic, but then there's also this depth of creativity, collaboration, connection that technology allows for. And to prepare for this, I was going back through and reading a lot of Freire's old work, and specifically with the lens of his views on technology and our interaction with technology. And he, from what I found at least, was this idea of seeing the possibilities and the liberatory potential of technology, but also seeing in some of his later work, talking about how we've begun to sort of worship and idolize technology and seeing it as this almost this religion of technology, and seeing that contrast, the Jen, that you were just talking about the harms and the potential that exists within this digital space.
And to add a layer to this, Jamie in the chat says, when we talk about accessibility, of course, we talked about laptops, electricity, smartphones, but even accessibility to a space, the environment in which to engage and learn, even if they do have tech. So we're talking about social justice now. We're talking about social justice and accessibility beyond just the tech, just the space and the environment in which to do the work. We make assumptions about that. Go ahead.
Just a thought to that too, part of my thinking through a lot of this pandemic has been, we never stop to ask the right questions, right? Like we worry about gaining access to the dominant structure and dominant education and preserving the precious institution of schooling. And we work so hard to tell people how to do that, right? And we work so hard to replicate the institution in people's homes. And it's like we never stop to ask like the other questions, like should we be doing this, or how should we be doing this? And like one of the things that I got really frustrated with myself as a teacher was that I felt like at the beginning of this, I was reading all the articles, I was participating in the conversations, like, okay, don't require cameras, done, right? Okay, give multiple asynchronous, synchronous, done. Okay, don't require this, record this, done, right? And I was like kind of like doing all of these things, and I was just like catching up to this standard, and I'm like anti-standards, right? And so I'm like doing all this, I'm exhausting myself, I'm exhausting my students, and it's like, this just needs to be something different, right? Like we just need, this is the opportunity to conceive education differently, and no one's having that freaking conversation. It was so these spaces are emerging, right? I think as a result of that, but I really kind of still to this day I'm grappling about how much I participated in the myth, right, that was being fed to me, and then what I can do to deconstruct that and really reimagine something different, because I think that this is our moment, and if we don't do it now, when, right?
Exactly. And we have some agreement. I call this the amen corner in the chat. Yes, Jen, yes, from Justin. Justin also goes on to pose this related to our conversation here. How and where can we create opportunities for those who lack access to self-advocate? How can those who lack the technology they need appeal to power? Okay, lowercase p. Appeal to power to those who could provide it. Who would like to take that on?
I love that, Justin. I greatly appreciate all of your questions, because the technology in part is new, but the access to systems to challenge power, I think is a older question of, this argument of you can only challenge the system within the bounds of the system if you know the right ways to appeal a process or to challenge a process or to get access to a process. So you have to be in the system to challenge the system, but if you're in the system, you get followed up by it. So I don't know the answer to that, but that is something I also think about a lot, and trying to provide more community spaces, mutual aid spaces, organizing spaces, and to do that out, in our case, for example, outside of the institution or outside of the academy, where it's a more accessible space to people who don't have the right access. But that's a challenge. It's something I struggle with all the time.
In the chat, we have from Amanda. She shared with me she's working on her PhD. I'm a part of a team at New America, and we had a series of roundtables of digital equity, culturally responsive teaching, and education. The point of rethinking and reframing education came up often. And she has provided a link here in the chat. Please check that out. Sabrina, the demands for surveillance into students' homes. Oh, here we come with Professor Stacy's word, the panopticon. The demands for surveillance into students' homes and being present by requiring students to have cameras on or dressed a particular way is a power dynamic. Yes, Sabrina, thank you. Let's talk about it. Power has invaded our homes. During this pandemic, the panopticon, you shared about that yesterday.
You want me to talk about that? I'll share with you all. Oh, I didn't mean to. Sorry. I'll share with you the both of my presentations are on the same PowerPoint if you weren't at the talk yesterday. But essentially, what my co-author Miguel and I did yesterday was we kind of talked through this theoretical framework that we're developing about the virtual panopticon that emerged from COVID-19, and this idea that, like, if you've read any of Michel Foucault's work, he talks about how we're constantly being regulated and disciplined by the institution, but in ways, right, like borrowing from that quote that I shared earlier, like in ways that seem to have benefits to us, that perpetuate hegemony and common sense, and that also are like not seen, right, like they hum in the background, right? There's these regulatory tools that increasingly become more semiotic. And so essentially, we put cameras in people's homes, like what, I'm sorry, who was it that said that? Sabrina said, right? We put cameras in people's homes and we ask them to change their homes to be in the image of the state. And in doing so, right, we've infiltrated these ideologies of the state and these, particularly this like neoliberalism of how we can, get in there and manipulate you and change you to be right in forms of progress or however the state needs us to be at the time being. And in doing that, right, we've definitely disproportionately done that differently with minoritized households, people who speak different languages, people who are people of color, right, and minoritized populations. And so it's like and disinvest it, right? So when we were talking about the media, the digital media divide and all of that earlier, right? Like we really have done this to the point where, people are resisting, but it is also kind of this, we've gained a lot of access to people. And out of that, we are starting to see new technologies of discipline and new punishments that are just becoming common sense. Well, you didn't turn your camera on and you weren't in uniform in your own freaking home. And so of course you're a C student. Of course, right? You're bad, right? Your family's bad. Your parents don't care. All of these things that have come out of this era that we're going to take with us if we're not careful to criticize them. Is that a good enough summary?
Yeah. Mike, do you have any thoughts about this? Surveillance in people's homes.
Yeah, just to echo what Jen said, we were talking earlier about access to technology, to learning environments, but also that access that we have all essentially had to provide to continue to participate to the state, to institutions, and giving them almost unfettered access to not only our personal data, but our homes, our lives, our families. Like it's a bit overwhelming.
And like, I know if Miguel was here, he'd want to definitely add in some of the queer theory that we've drawn in is about the public domain of the private space, and how there's elements of human life that we've determined that certain groups of people can regulate for other groups of people, right? And in some of that, it's like we want to both have access to it and regulate it, but also not see it, right? And keep it private, right? And so if you think of queer theory and you think of people's sexuality and things like that makes like a pretty clear argument. But when we think about like parenting, right, and raising kids, or we think about college students, right, and like what we expect to see out of pre-service teachers, right, in their home space, right, we are now imposing that ideology on the home space and asking people to reconfigure themselves, right, and how they're seen and how they see themselves in these like value structures, right, good or bad or worthy or not worthy. And we've done that like with like, it's not just like with the tools, but human participation with the tools. So we looked a lot at like social media, public shaming, news articles, what was even like considered newsworthy, right? There's like these newscasters doing reports over like parents smoking weed in their house. Like how many people are smoking the weed in their house right now, right? But all of a sudden it becomes news because it's happening when a child is on Zoom, right, in the other room or what have you. And so it's like, all of these layers that now we've entered into this like really like shady ground of trying to change who people are just because we put schools in homes, right? Like, I mean, it's really problematic.
For sure, for sure. This has been very rich, and I want for us to have some concluding thoughts in the last 3 minutes. The time is really going by. In the last 3 minutes, audience, do you have any more questions? Please feel free to share, and our discussants, if you have any more comments or concluding thoughts before we wrap up. Now's the time. All right. Well, with that said, I want to say to everyone, thank you for joining us today. It has been very insightful. Thank you for sharing resources here in the chat. If you have not seen them, please click on them, save them to your laptop. But a number of resources are here in the chat. Again, we thank Professor Karlin and Stacy for their time. We thank you, the audience. Please join us for a future, or should I say the next sessions, as well as the future conference next year. Miranda, thank you very much for attending along with everyone else. Make sure you follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. All right, thank you, everyone. And Jen and Mike, can I speak to you?
Thank you guys so much.